Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Jacob, there was a ton of movie news, specifically last week, that we just didn't have a chance to get to until now. So I'm excited to talk to you about it today. There's some big stuff here, and then a few things that have come out in more recent days. But let's start by talking about Quentin Tarantino. His what we thought was going to be his next project, his final film his final feature film as a director, was called The Movie Critic. And a report came out last week that Tarantino literally just changed his mind and decided to drop this movie altogether. He once described this movie as basically being about Travis Bickle if he were a film critic. And I think I read a report that said that Brad Pitt may have been reprising his role as Cliff Booth from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So what was your reaction when you saw this news?
I don't know. I mean, Tarantino, such an odd situation because he doesn't need to stop with 10 movies. His whole 10-movie plan has always been ridiculous to me. But he's also been a guy who's been a master of self-mythologizing. He clearly wants to stick to this plan of making 10 movies, technically 11 because Kill Bill is 2 movies, and call it quits. And he wants to make this last one perfect, which to me, it's silly. I mean, look at Martin Scorsese. He's still making great movies into his 70s and 80s. So, I don't know. I just think the idea, this obsession with this, my last movie needs to be perfect. I need to only make 10 movies and stop, is keeping us from getting more Tarantino movies. So I think he's kind of shooting himself in the foot with his legacy here. I really wanted to see this movie, man. It sounded really interesting, and I wanted to see this movie. Then I wanted to. He's gonna make 11 movies. He's gonna make 12 movies. I don't actually buy he's gonna only stop at 10. So just make the damn Movie Critic movie. That's my reaction to this news, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I was intrigued by several aspects of it. I'm honestly a little less intrigued at the Brad Pitt of it all, or the Cliff Booth specifically. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess yes, of course, like that character fits into the time period because I think this was supposed to take place in like the porn scene in the 70s and stuff like that. So like, yes, I can see Cliff Booth, I guess, wandering around in that scene in Hollywood or whatever. But like, I don't know. I guess I just want new. I want all new things from Tarantino as much as possible. So I don't know. Do you think this is going to be one of those situations where like he drops a project only to then pick it back up again like he did with The Hateful Eight? Or do you think he's really done with this?
I don't know. The Hateful Eight's definitely the accurate comparison here because that film, when the script leaked, if people don't remember this, the script leaked early online, and Tarantino loudly canceled it before he fell back in love with it and made it. So who knows? But I will chime in and say that Cliff Booth is a like top 5 Tarantino character. So even if he was like wandering around the margins of the story, I would have been interested. But I think it was, can't remember what the report on this, whoever broke it, had a detail that apparently Cliff Booth was originally a minor role in the script and started taking over control of the story, like started becoming a bigger and bigger character.
Interesting. Okay.
One of the reasons why Tarantino apparently dropped it was that he realized he was writing a Cliff Booth movie instead of a movie about the character he set out to write, which is extremely interesting. It makes you wonder if he does retool this, if he just goes all out with a Cliff Booth movie, which would be a choice and one that I have mixed feelings on because I love Cliff Booth, but also, like you said, I would like to see him create more characters to squeeze out of the top 5.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you mentioned Scorsese earlier, and a report came out. This is still very, very early days, but evidently Martin Scorsese is once again planning to make a biopic about Frank Sinatra, with Leonardo DiCaprio playing the lead role, and Jennifer Lawrence playing Sinatra's second wife, Ava Gardner. He tried this one time before, back around 2011 or so, but he ended up clashing with Sinatra's family over his vision for the material. And Frank Sinatra's daughter, Tina, still has to sign off on this new version before it can actually move forward. So who knows if it'll ever actually happen. But what do you make of this being, potentially one of the last Martin Scorsese movies, if it actually happens?
I mean, this is very much all the things that Scorsese enjoys in one subject. I mean, if anybody's going to make a Frank Sinatra biopic, it really needs to be Scorsese. I'm a little less sold on DiCaprio. I love DiCaprio, but I'm having a hard time 100% imagining him in the part. But I'm willing to see where this goes. I think this is a very exciting pairing of director and material. And the most famous piece of writing on Frank Sinatra, an old Esquire profile from the 60s called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. is incredible because it gives you this really unvarnished look at him as a person. And my guess is that that's what Scorsese wants to make, and not what his estate wants him to make.
Yeah. So you mentioned the DiCaprio thing and kind of bumping up against that casting a little bit. Um, Physically, they don't really share that many similarities, I guess, in terms of like body type and whatever. I'm not really super concerned about that as much as like capturing the essence and things like that. The thing that I am curious about is like the music aspect of it. Do you think that Scorsese would actually be interested in making a biopic that actually has, several scenes where DiCaprio as Sinatra is like up on stage crooning and like doing that whole thing? Because that's what I think of. When you think of music biopic, you think of what Bohemian Rhapsody and like whatever Rocket Man and like this recent slate of movies that make 700 million to $1 billion because they're about a famous person, Elvis, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And a lot of those movies feature tons of songs and performances, and that's not really what I imagine Scorsese's take would be like. But do you think he would still be interested in making this movie if it did sort of fit into a little bit more of that formulaic kind of vision that modern biopics seem to hold today?
I'm not sure, but Scorsese does love the musical number. I mean, I think people often forget that he made a musical in 1977 with New York, New York, a film that's not considered his best, but he made a full-fledged, straight-up musical starring Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. And that's not. And then there's his concert films like The Last Waltz. The man loves a good musical performance. The man loves filming musical performances. So my one concern was that I can't imagine DiCaprio singing. I don't think he's gonna. Even if I don't think DiCaprio has a singing voice, and if he did, he doesn't have Sinatra's singing voice. So I just don't think I want to watch extended sequences of DiCaprio lip syncing to Sinatra. So I don't know. We're gonna put a pin in this one for now.
Yeah, I was trying to think of scenes where DiCaprio has sang on film. I'm not sure what the correct past tense of that word is there in this context. But the only thing that came to mind quickly was the the moment from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where he's singing "What's Behind the Green Door," and like that is very. First of all, it's bad singing, but I kind of feel like it's bad singing on purpose. So I don't really think I have a good sense of DiCaprio's actual abilities as a singer in that way. So yeah, just really curious to see what happens there. And I guess like secondarily, what do you make of the Jennifer Lawrence as Ava Gardner casting?
Oh, no complaints. That's great.
Yeah.
that's actually pretty perfect. I also just want to jump in here and say that another Scorsese biopic that was announced like 15 years ago now, maybe even more, was he was going to make a Theodore Roosevelt biopic starring DiCaprio. And all I'm saying is, like, make that one first. I've been waiting 15 years for Scorsese's Theodore Roosevelt biopic. So, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, Scorsese's going to live forever. He has time for Sinatra, Theodore Roosevelt, and his adaptation of The Wager, the new book by David Grand, which is a fantastic book. I've talked about this on the show before, so I don't need to go in detail. But he's also making his Jesus movie, which is probably going to start Andrew Garfield. So I don't know. I just love that he's so busy, and I love that he's proving Tarantino's whole theory that filmmakers, get bad with age wrong. Keep going, man. Keep going.
Yeah, fully agree. Okay, speaking of another, I guess like classic sort of veteran filmmaker, Steven Spielberg is quietly planning another movie about aliens. So he's looking to make his next film, which has been described as a UFO film based on his own original idea. And David Koepp, who wrote the screenplay for Spielberg's Jurassic Park, is writing the script here. Again, this is very, very early. We don't have any more details beyond that. But what do you make of Spielberg returning to the world of aliens?
Look, I love it when a director has an obsession. I love it when a director constantly orbits a theme or an idea or a subject that legitimately fascinates them. I mean, Scorsese, Catholic guilt, crime, innocence, Tarantino, classic Hollywood, and now Spielberg and aliens. It's just, look, I think that Spielberg has made some of the best science fiction of the past 50 years. E.T., Conspiracy of the Third Kind, and His War of the Worlds are all fantastic alien movies and all very different. And I think specifically the report said that's a UFO movie, which and maybe I'm reading it too literally, but a UFO movie versus an alien movie, both give off different vibes to me. I'm reading into this too deeply. I'm putting on my conspiracy theory hat. But I just love the idea of Spielberg making not just an alien movie, but a UFO movie, something about in that Close Encounters vein, the idea of what's in the sky, how visitors come to us. There's a degree of intelligence to a concept of a UFO movie as opposed to an alien movie. Alien movie can imply, just a horror or something a bit more genre based, whereas UFO movie implies to me, just in my heart of hearts, men in fedoras looking at burn marks in the road that determine did something land here. So that's me out of the blue with no evidence saying that's what I want from Spielberg here is a alien movie set in the 70s where men in fedoras and suits track down UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring a good point there. Like the UFO connotation, it kind of has like a more of a mystery angle to it, right? Like, or just a sense of mystery sort of surrounds that word, the unidentified part of that. Once the actual aliens are like out in play, it becomes much more like procedural by definition. Like, how are we going to deal with this? Now that we as humanity have discovered this thing, but like when it's still unidentified, it seems like there's a lot more potential there for drama, frankly, like a different kind of drama, I guess you could say. So, yeah, I'm with you. I kind of hope that they keep it, or that if he actually goes forward with this movie, he keeps it mysterious for as long as possible, and doesn't necessarily just like, blow the big reveal the first 20 minutes and then have humanity figure out what that means afterwards. So,
yeah, and not to pull a Ryan Scott here. Speaking of our slash film colleague Ryan Scott, and one of his pet peeves is films that are way too big and needlessly expensive. But I would love to see a Spielberg science fiction movie on the scale of The Fabelmans, something along that budget and scope, and even like that like level of groundedness that is a smaller story. Like look back at E.T. E.T. has what 3 or 4 set pieces that are like relatively low key in comparison to like modern stuff. I would love to see the Spielberg who made The Fabelmans make a UFO movie. I don't necessarily need him to make a War of the World style massive film with this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's take a break and then we'll be right back. All right, so I'm very curious to know what you think about this next story, Jacob. So, Disney is once again trying to turn a classic theme park ride into a movie, and we're curious of whether or not this is going to work this time. So, Disney is once again trying to make a Space Mountain film. And Max Landis and Max Borenstein both tried to make versions back in the day that were ultimately scrapped. Joby Harold, who wrote King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword, tried to make a version in 2020. That ended up never happening. Now we have 2 new writers, Josh Applebaum and Andre Nemec, who have been hired to write the latest iteration of Space Mountain for Disney. So these are the people who have worked on Amazon's super expensive and apparently terrible series Citadel from the Russo brothers. I never saw that show, so I can't speak authoritatively to its quality, but everything I heard.
I can. Citadel is the worst TV show I've ever seen on a major streaming platform.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty definitive there, Jacob. So, yeah, and then also like they also worked on Netflix's live action version of Cowboy Bebop, which from everything about that show's reputation, it doesn't really have a great one. So, not exactly filling me with confidence here, but I know you're a big theme park guy, a big Disney guy in particular. What do you think about a Space Mountain film?
Okay, here's the problem with Space Mountain as a movie. Let's look at Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion, probably the other 2 major classic Disney attractions, form like sort of like triumvirate of Magic Kingdom style, classics. As much as the Haunted Mansion movies and the Pirates of the Caribbean movies modify the source material, the original rides, there is a narrative there. In Pirates of the Caribbean, you are going on a boat ride through a pirate invasion of a port town. In Haunted Mansion, you are going through a tour of a haunted house full of ghosts and characters. Space Mountain does not have that. There is literally no story whatsoever. It is for those of you who don't know, Space Mountain is an indoor roller coaster, largely in the dark. There are some very not especially like major effects, like star projections and lighting effects and some set design, but it's not like the other rides where like you are told a story, where like there are voices and characters and a sense of narrative. It is just a journey through the stars on board a rocket ship. It is very basic by Disney theme park standards, and it's a beloved ride, and it's neat. And if every time I make it down to Disney, which is increasingly less and less as I as I get older and poorer, it's something I make sure I ride. But there's no easy way in. There's no hook. I do not know what a Space Mountain movie is. I can immediately picture what a Haunted Mansion movie is. That's why they made two of them. And I can immediately picture what a Pirates of the Caribbean movie could be, which is why there's a whole franchise. Uh, but Space Mountain has to lift a heavier load here. It legitimately needs to create a premise because there is no premise. It's just a famous name. It's just the famous name of a famous roller coaster.
Yeah, I was trying to think about like even the queue area, the line that you wait in to actually get into the ride. I don't even really think there's much there that you could take as like story building blocks, you know?
There's nothing. I mean, there's the suggestion, if you like really want to read into it, is that you're taking a space voyage. Space Mountain is, if you want to take it literally, is the name of the spaceport you're disembarking from. That's literally what it is. God goodness, even Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, the other roller coaster, the other famous roller coaster at Disney, has an actual narrative going on. It has actual mythology. It has like Easter eggs and clues, and there's like an entire unwritten but known story that informs all the visuals that's happening on that roller coaster. That doesn't really exist for Space Mountain. And my guess here, Ben, is that Space Mountain is an older ride. It's been retracked over the years, but it's getting kind of rough. And I'm probably wondering if Disney desperately needs a movie like this, because it'll give them an excuse to refurbish Space Mountain, put some characters in there, put some story in there, give it a facelift, give it a whole new redesign. But they don't want to invest in something that's not a franchise. They want to invest in something that has that can move people to Disney Plus or get people in theaters, and they're not prepared to spend the tens of millions of dollars necessary to bring Space Mountain up to 2024 standards unless they have a movie franchise tied to it. Because I could be speaking out of turn here, but I can't escape that thought.
I mean, yeah, with Disney, like you have to think about stuff like that. Like everything is connected in that way. So that makes a lot of sense. I do wonder that, like, they have whatever Guardians of the Galaxy, which I guess they've already sort of themed a ride on. But you could think that maybe they could dive back into their IP library in some way and pull out something else. Like they've done that before. They've gotten rid of beloved rides like what was the one? Is it Tower of Terror that they got rid of that they sort of rethemed into a Guardians of the Galaxy ride? Is that right?
Okay, this is where we get into the weeds here. There are two Tower of Terror rides. There's Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Orlando at Disney World, and the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Disney's California Adventure Park on the West Coast. They removed the one on the West Coast. Well, not removed. They rethemed it to Guardians of the Galaxy. But the one on the East Coast in Florida still exists. And this is where I want to bring this up again, because I feel like I'm going off the rails here, but I promise this will make sense in a second. The one that was rethemed to Guardians was a lesser version of the ride. It was pumped out very quickly on extremely low budget to try to bring more visitors into a theme park that nobody was enjoying at the time. So people were mad about it, but not as mad as they were about as if the Florida original had gone away. So it was a much more complex, richer, more narrative-driven experience. That's a much, much better ride. However, a few years ago, Disney announced that they were making a Tower of Terror movie, as Scarlett Johansson was attached to make. It seems to be in limbo right now, but there was no mention of Twilight Zone at all in any of the releases about that, which is a Tower of Terror movie. That's because Disney has to pay for the Twilight Zone license for their Florida attraction, which you no longer need to do for the California one because it's now Guardians of the Galaxy. So my guess there was that they were going to make a Tower of Terror movie so they could remove Twilight Zone from the equation altogether and make it a Disney IP, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think about this stuff, because I guarantee you Disney's looking for ways to turn all of its non-Disney specific property rides and all of its non-franchise rides into Disney movie franchises. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, because that's the same way how Disney used to make theme park rides that were based on original ideas that existed on their own and were just a product of engineers and artists making cool shit. And now everything has to be based on something. It's like we can't just make a ride that's fun and immersive. It has to be based on Moana, or it has to be based on Encanto. Anyway, this is a very specific pet peeve of mine, so I apologize for taking it off the rails.
No. I'm curious about it too, because you mentioned Space Mountain has been around for a while. Like I remember that ride being around, when I was a kid going to Walt Disney World, and I don't think they've gotten too many significant upgrades in the years since. So like, why do you think it's taken Disney so long to make a Space Mountain movie? Like, is it just because Space Mountain is one of those sort of premier attractions at Disneyland, one of the few roller coasters that they have, and it's like actually important to the identity of the theme parks that the studio doesn't want to release a movie version that could potentially tarnish that or be negatively associated with it in some way?
I mean, if bad movies killed theme park attractions, Parts of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion would have burned down a long time ago.
I guess that's true. That's a good
uh,
point.
I legitimately think it's just because there's no easy way in. And also, I think Disney. Let's look at the last time Disney has tried major science fiction movies that weren't part of an established franchise already. Like, let's forget about Tron. Tron Legacy was it wasn't a disaster, but also wasn't a major hit. But it was part of it was a sequel. People know what Tron is.
Mhm.
But the last time they tried a major science fiction movie with Disney theme park connections, there was Tomorrowland. An adaptation of the entire theme park land in which Space Mountain resides in the parks. And I love Brad Bird, but goodness, that movie's a stinker. It's a bad
Yeah.
movie, and it was a box office bomb, and rightfully so. So I think that Disney is wary about science fiction and original science fiction, especially.
Yeah, that's a good point. Man, I totally forgot that Tomorrowland even exists.
Oh, it
But I'm
sucks. It's so bad.
okay, so let's talk about one of the best revenge movies of all time is being adapted into a TV series. So Park Chan-wook's 2003 film Oldboy is being remade as an English language TV show from I think Lionsgate TV is the one behind this, the company behind this. So Jacob, immediately my obvious reaction to this is a terrible idea. But on the other hand, Park Chan-wook is actually involved in making this show. So where do you fall on this one?
Terrible idea, but Park Chan-wook being involved makes me wonder what the heck's going on. I don't. I always assume that not everybody's seen Oldboy. Let's forget the Spike Lee remake exists entirely because it's just focused entirely on the Korean original.
Yeah.
Which, as our headline, the site said, is the best revenge movie ever made. I kind of feel very strong about this. It is the definitive for me example of what a revenge film can be in every single possible way. But it also is pretty contained. It's set over a long period of years, but it has a very, very specific structure, a very, very specific third act that's very memorable, and it goes to some really fascinating, awful places. I am very interested in Park Chan-wook making a revenge TV series. I don't know what Oldboy is beyond a movie. I don't think the narrative in that film sustains a TV show. So the question becomes: is like the end of the movie the season finale, and we see what happens next? Because I'm not so sure how you come back from that.
Yeah.
But if you draw the mystery out and make the ending of the movie the series finale after 3 to 5 seasons, everybody watching will know what the ending is already. You're building toward a conclusion everybody already knows. So I don't know. I am excited for more Park Chan-wook. I always will be. Decision to Leave, great movie. I really expect and hope this will be a very untraditional adaptation that will sort of spin off in a completely different direction rather than try to follow the beats of the movie, because I do not see how that movie functions at all beyond 2 hours.
Yeah, like the beginning of the movie, it's been a while since I've seen it. I know it got I think Neon re-released in theaters last year, and it was playing on Netflix for a little while. It might be on Hulu right now. I'll have to double check that before this episode is over. But no, it looks like it's not on Hulu anymore. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think the beginning of the movie, Jacob, if memory serves, is that the protagonist is basically kidnapped and kept in isolation for like 15 years or something. So like the idea of adapting this into a show, do you have that be the first few episodes or something with like flashbacks of what happened to his life before? Then it just starts to feel like you're stretching out. I don't know. You're always going to be comparing it against the movie, right? And so it's always going to feel a little stretched out. There are great adaptations, of course, that like, have cracked the code on how to stretch things out in a way that feels necessary, but they're few and far between. And I guess with Park Chan-wook involved, I'm more willing to give this the benefit of the doubt than I would be otherwise. But Yeah, I'm just like I'm very hesitant about this, just because the film has such a great reputation. And if you've never seen Oldboy, it's quite something. It's not necessarily for everybody, and it can be pretty gnarly at times. But it's like one of the most famous Korean films of all time, and like I would recommend watching it if you like movies and care about movies. Even though
Arguably, we would not be talking about Korean cinema in the West, and Parasite would not have won Best Picture at the Oscars if not for Oldboy breaking that barrier. I legitimately think everybody listening to this podcast who has not seen Oldboy should watch Oldboy.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to our last story here, which is that the Sundance Film Festival, which has been based in Park City, Utah for 40 years, is now soliciting bids to relocate the festival to another city. So, a couple things right up top. We aren't sure that the festival will actually move. There's a chance that it stays in Park City. Also, if it does move, the festival won't be impacted until 2027. So, there's a little bit of time there. We also don't know what type of offers might come in and whether the festival's leadership would entertain the idea of moving the whole fest to like a big metropolitan area, or whether they would just want to like retain the sort of off the beaten path, small town nature of it, and maybe just like find another place in the country that has kind of a Park City vibe. But if it does move, this could be a serious shakeup to one of the biggest film festivals in the world. So, what do you make of this, Jacob?
Oh goodness! Speaking as somebody who has to run a movie website, it's becoming increasingly difficult to cover Sundance. Park City is isolated; it's expensive. Getting a writer out there and then making money on the stuff we do at Sundance is becoming increasingly next to impossible. If people wonder why our Sundance coverage has been reduced in recent years, there's a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. The idea of Sundance moving to a metropolitan area with more hotels, more reasonable travel costs, would be really, really good for covering Sundance, but it would be really, really bad for Park City, a community that's built this entire economy around the point of the year where thousands of people come to the film festival. This is like the shark from Jaws coming in and wrecking shop at Amity. Um, I know that part of the Sundance vibe is that it's in the middle of nowhere in this beautiful, picturesque, small community. And I genuinely think it's not going to move. I genuinely think that this is a very, very public Game of Thrones move from the Sundance heads to try to get a deal going so that it's going to be better for them. But also, Park City makes Sundance an incredibly fun festival for people to attend, but one that's next to impossible to viably cover in 2024. Plus, my opinion is that I would love to see it move, just because I would love to have Sundance coverage in full bloom on slashfilm.com, and it's becoming impossible. But also, I don't want an entire community to get shut down and people's livelihood to be damaged because I want more reviews on my website. So that's where I stand right now. A little contradictory, but that's where I am.
Yeah, it's complicated because it would really, I feel like it would pretty much devastate the local economy there. But I've also heard from locals while I've been there covering the fest in person, like some local people hate the festival and hate all of the stuff that comes with it, all the people that come in and sort of upend their little picturesque town for whatever it is, 10 days or something every year. And yes, there's a ton of money that comes into it, but I wonder how, like, what the actual people of Park City and the sort of surrounding areas would really feel about this. Like, if there's some way to, I don't know. I guess ultimately we should probably wait and have this conversation when and if it actually moves. But yeah, if you're listening to this podcast and you live in the area where you would be like economically affected if Sundance decided to move, send us an email because I would love to know what you think about that. And I guess, like, yeah, any other closing thoughts on this, Jacob? I think we pretty much said it, right?
Yeah, I may, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here, but we'll say when we ran our article in Hollywood Reporter and Variety and other sites went with a very similar angle of Sundance looking for a new home. Within minutes, I got an email from somebody associated with, they were with a publicity firm, but presumably one with ties to Sundance, saying, "Hey, can you change your headline?" That and saying like pretty much heavily implying that Sundance, you're saying they're looking for a new home, but they're just looking for potential offers for a new place to move. And I'm going, isn't that the same thing? We had back and forth. I didn't change the headline because Variety Hollywood Reporter weren't going to change their headline, so why should we? I wasn't going to be bullied into that. But that move suggested that the narrative of Sundance abandoning Park City was the clear narrative hook to the story of, oh my God, that's a big deal. And clearly that's not what the Sundance publicists wanted to be the main narrative here, which is why I think this is very much a negotiation ploy as opposed to a hard, firm, we're moving subject.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, we'll have to see what happens. And obviously, if any big announcements are made, we will come back and talk about that on a future episode of the podcast. So you can find much more about all the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes for this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you could find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk